After 6,000 years of bread baking, Corning introduces a whole new way to bake bread, the bake-around. The bake-around is a remarkable tube of oven-proof glass that just may make the bread pan obsolete.
And then I should just be able to...
The bake-around by Corning. Anyone nice enough to bake bread deserves one.
It's so round! Hello, and welcome to this episode of Happy Baking. This is another episode of the As Seen on TV series. If you missed the first episode, it was for the Betty Crocker Bake Fill pan. Let's talk about the bake-around pan. This pan is strangely a glass tube inside of a metal holder. What does it do? Why was it created? Will it work? Well, we've given that away. It will. But how exactly does it work? I'd love to show you. Nothing says delicious like something perfectly cylindrical in shape. So let's get baking. The Bake-Around bread maker is for people who want to make bread without any bother. It's simply and easily the best bread maker around. The best bread maker. You bake bread in a glass. You bake bread in a glass tube, which lets you watch the magic of bread making happen. Then the tube is held, carried, and stored in its own handy rack. The handiest rack. There's no fuss, no bother. Cleaning's a breeze. Browning is even. Sticking is at a minimum. It barely sticks at all. No matter which recipe you use, you'll end up with a perfectly shaped, crispy, crusted loaf of freshly baked bread every time. Unless you use a different pan, of course. Okay, back to my regular voice. I first stumbled across the Bake-Around pan at an antique store in Waukesha, Wisconsin when I was visiting a friend. I didn't purchase it at the time because I was traveling and I couldn't really carry it with me, but I posted about it on my social media and a colleague said, "My mom actually has 2 of those, so I'm gonna send you one." She sent me one in the mail and I knew it was gonna be perfect for the next episode in our As Seen on TV series. The Bake-Around pan attempts to solve 2 major problems that people often have when making bread at home. The first is shaping. The cylindrical shape of the tube makes shaping a little bit easier, theoretically. What happens is we're going to press a soft dough into the center of the tube. Then it's going to conform to that shape while it rises and bakes. This makes it easier to get an attractive rounded shape, sort of like you see in bakery-style crusty loaves. The second is the glass container, which contributes to a crisp browned crust. For years, lots of equipment and recipes have tried to emulate the style of a professional bread baking oven, which often has additional features to help the loaves get crustier exteriors. Lots of professional bread baking ovens have steam injection or stone decks that really helps to promote that exterior getting nice and golden brown. This pan uses glass, which is an insulator. That means it takes a while for it to heat up, but once it's hot, it stays hot for a long time. This helps the dough to expand as much as possible during the early stages of baking. Then it helps the crust brown due to that extended retention of the heat. Now, admittedly, glass is not one of my favorite materials for any type of baking pan, but you can consider this sort of similar to the more modern technique of baking a crusty loaf inside a Dutch oven. The main goal is to end up with a crisp, crunchy exterior and a soft interior on your loaf. Let's get mixing some dough so I can show you exactly how this pan works, and then we'll turn it into a delicious Italian sub because the Bake-Around was really made for making sub sandwiches. I did create my own recipe for this loaf, but I adapted it from one of the recipes that's included in the Bake-Around packet. They include a few different styles of bread in this. I just mostly wanted to use it as a guide to make sure I had the right quantity of dough. It should be noted that the instructions warn you to only use a bread dough made using the straight dough or sponge method, or anything that holds its shape. So really, this encompasses a lot of different types of bread. The main thing that I wanted to do was create something with a crusty exterior and a softer interior, something that's perfect for a sandwich. In my recipe, I wanted to make sure I used a similar hydration ratio just to create a loaf that was as similar as possible to the ones they recommended using, but I wanted to add a few personal touches to it. I like to add non-fat dry milk to recipes like this because it helps make that interior crumb super soft. I wanted to use instant yeast because I feel like that's a little bit easier, especially for people baking at home. I also wanted to put a little bit of butter into the dough, and I wanted to coat the bottom of the loaf in sesame seeds for a little crunch. In short, my recipe is definitely adapted from the packet, but with a few happy baking tweaks to give it a little more flavor and to make sure that those textures are spot on. Now let's prepare the pan for baking. Grease the inside of your bake-around tube within 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters, of its ends. Butter or shortening may be used, but do not use oil. Don't you dare. So basically the pamphlet says to use butter or shortening to grease the pan, not oil. So this isn't a time to use your nonstick spray, something I normally quite like to use with bread doughs. So we're gonna use butter. It also says to only do it within 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters of the ends. I think the main purpose is if you use too much fat towards the ends, it may melt out into your oven because there's really no protection on the sides. So I'm just gonna use my hand to put butter in this tube. Just another day. Just another sentence I never thought I'd say. This is definitely one of the weirdest parts of this recipe as I stick my entire arm into this tube to butter it. I'm just using about a tablespoon of butter. I won't even use all of that. This feels so wrong. It's fine. It's fine. Just gonna smear butter all over. I'm kind of twisting it. Okay. Then I want to put some sesame seeds on 1/2 of the tube, kind of to cover the base of my loaf. To do this, I have a little, just one of my plastic 1/2 pint containers that I use all the time for prep in my kitchen. And it's kind of the perfect size to fit on the end. Mainly, I just want to catch any sesame seeds once I start adding them. So what I think I'll do to start is just have it standing up. And I'll sort of pour the sesame seeds down one side. Oops. And then they get caught down here in the other tube. I mean, this is like one of the problems with a round pan already. Is, you know, it is a little bit harder, this first part. But of course, the sesame seed thing is definitely optional. It's more for like some flavor and texture. And it is hard to get that crisp outer crust. So like, I think for some people, the shaping of a loaf is tricky. That crisp outer crust is kind of tricky, and so maybe working with a cylinder is well worth it in those cases. You decide. It's up to you, friends. Whatever makes you happy while you're baking. Okay, look, we got sesame seeds in our tube. What am I doing today? And back in the handy wire rack. As it should be. Before we can mix the dough, we need to heat up some of these liquid ingredients. I'm going to heat the milk, water, and butter, which I already have in this small pot. I'm also going to add the sugar to that. I'm also gonna add the salt. This is just gonna help both of these ingredients dissolve, and it's gonna get our liquid heated up to a nice temperature for the bread dough to rise. I'm gonna heat this up until the liquid comes to a simmer and the butter is fully melted, and then I wanna cool it down to about 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius. Earlier, I mentioned the straight dough mixing method. This is one of the most common mixing methods for bread, but you don't always hear it referred to as that. Like you may be familiar if you make cakes with the creaming method because it says to cream the butter and sugar. But the straight dough method isn't always listed like that in a recipe, but basically what it is just mixing all the ingredients together to combine. It couldn't be any simpler. So I'm basically gonna put all of our ingredients into the mixer to start. And we'll first start on a lower speed to help the dough start to come together, and then we'll raise the speed and mix it until it's totally smooth. I'm gonna start by putting my flour in. I've also got some dry milk powder. It helps to make that interior crumb a little bit softer. It's really kind of a magical ingredient in the bread world, so don't be tempted to skip it. And then I've got some instant yeast. I'm just gonna start by mixing those ingredients to combine just enough that I'm not pouring the hot liquid right on top of that yeast or right on top of that dry milk powder. That's good, just enough to kind of stir them to combine. This is my liquid mixture, that milk, the water, the butter, the sugar's in there, the salt's in there, they're all dissolved now, the butter is melted, and I heated it up, but then cooled it down to that 100 degrees, 38 Celsius, and I'm just gonna add that to the mixer now too. When you're making bread and it calls for the liquid to be at a specific temperature, don't panic if you're 1 or 2 degrees, even 5 degrees off. The main thing is that we want it to be warm enough to properly dissolve the instant yeast. Instant yeast can be mixed directly into flour. It doesn't have to be kind of activated with warm water first, but it needs to be hot enough, that liquid, in order to properly dissolve it. Otherwise, you'll end up with little flecks of yeast in your dough. And we also want it to be warm enough to help stimulate that yeast activity. I'm gonna mix this first on a lower speed until the dough starts to come together. It'll be sort of a shaggy dough at first, but it'll start to form around the dough hook. It's gonna take about 3 minutes. Okay, that's looking pretty good. You can see what I mean by it being shaggy. It's just like not smooth yet, but it has fully come together. It's formed around the dough hook. It's completed the pickup stage, which means that it's picked up all of the ingredients in the bowl and formed them into one kind of section. Now that the dough has come together, I'm going to mix it on medium speed for 5 to 6 minutes more until it is super duper duper smooth. Okay, I think we're there. Ooh, look how nice and smooth that is now. It's just like really, really all lightened in color, a lot smoother in texture. It's really smooth and pliable, like bouncy almost. That's what I want to see in a dough like this. So I'm just rounding it a little bit. I'm gonna plop it into a lightly greased bowl, and I'm just gonna press it in there. I'm gonna cover it loosely with some plastic wrap or a clean kitchen towel and let it rise until it nearly doubles in size. It's gonna take about 30 to 45 minutes. Okay, I'm just going to uncover the dough, punch it down a little to deflate it, and turn it out onto a lightly floured work surface. Ooh, yeah, that's a nice puffy dough. Give it a little sprinkle. We don't need much flour here. Actually, too much flour can really make it difficult to shape this dough. So we really just want a little thin layer, just enough to prevent it from sticking or being tricky at all. Take the dough out. And the shaping method for this is so easy compared to a typical baguette or longer loaf shaping method, because we really are just kind of going to roll it into a spiral. But first we need to get it to the right size. I'm just gonna use my fingertips to press this and kind of pull the dough. I wanna retain a roughly rectangular shape. I'm gonna spread it out to about 6 by 10 inches or 15 by 25 centimeters. It doesn't need to be totally exact, and it doesn't even need to be a perfect rectangle. Ooh, I'm a little too wide and not long enough. So in that case, I'm just gonna stretch it out to make it longer and not focus on giving it any more width. That's a little better. I'm gonna rotate the bread so one of the shorter ends is facing me, and that's how we're gonna start shaping it. I'm gonna start up here at the top, and I'm just gonna pull the dough over and press really firmly with my fingertips to seal. Basically what we're gonna do is roll this into a spiral, but with each roll, press super duper firm to help seal. So this emulates kind of the early stages of bread shaping that are more traditional. And basically we just don't have to do the final part, which is stretching it out into that long loaf, because it's going to do that itself within the tube because it's confined to that shape. So I'm just pressing really firmly with my fingertips every time I rotate it. Once I am almost done and there's only a little bit of dough left, I want to switch my shaping technique. With that final fold over, I want to use the heel of my hand to really press and seal. Now, I've showed this before in some of my baking videos. The idea is we're going to fold it over using our thumb as a guide and then use this part of your hand to really press firmly. don't be afraid to really push with some strength because we really want a nice seal here. Otherwise, we might have a visible line on our final loaf. So I'm just going to do the final roll, rolling it over and pressing super firm with the heel of my hand. Now again, if we use too much flour here, this can actually be really hard to form that nice seal. So if you see a lot of extra visible flour, try dusting it away with a pastry brush just so it's not getting in your way. Okay, so I've got a nice seal here. I'm just pinching it one more time, making sure it's really nice and sealed. You can even roll it just a little bit just to make sure you flatten any seam. Now, inside the pamphlet, they tell you to cut a piece of parchment paper, put the loaf on the parchment, and use the parchment to thread it into the pan. I tried it and it was immensely complicated. It's one of those things sometimes I think, especially in older products, they're trying to make it easier for people at home, but they're also kind of underestimating people at home. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put it into the pan and show you how I do it, but I am gonna follow the rest of their shaping instructions. The first thing I'm gonna do is just pop the tube up a tiny bit because the metal holder sort of holds it in place and I don't want it blocking my entrance to the cylinder. And I'm just going to take my little loaf. I'm gonna place my other hand in the other side to help guide. And we're just gonna pull the loaf through like this. Now again, if that parchment paper thing sounds good to you, I'll show you a picture of what they say to do. It's just gonna use that to slide it in. I just found it to be kind of a pain. Once it's inside and kind of centered, here comes the fun part that is pictured on the box in the instructions. We're gonna use both of our hands as fists to press the dough from either end to help make it shorter and fatter, like taller in the pan. So we're just gonna keep pressing it. The goal is by the time you compress it, it should be about 4 to 6 inches long. Yeah, I'm at like 4.5, so I'm pretty spot on. Now what we need to do is let it rise, and we basically wanna let it rise until it's almost to the edges of the pan, like within 2 inches of the edge of the pan on both sides. At this point, I just wanna make sure it's in the very center, so hopefully it spreads out evenly. It's looking nice and centered to me. I also just wanna place some kind of cover on either side here. I'm gonna use just a little bit of plastic wrap because it's the easiest, but this is unusual. We don't want the ends of the bread to dry out. The inside is buttered, so it's less likely to dry out, but we just kind of need to cap those ends during this final rise. It needs about 45 to 90 minutes during the second rise, so I'm gonna pop it into my little proof box in the other room to help it go a little faster. Do you wanna see my little proof box? Yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay, let's go put it in there. This is a very well-loved, meaning I use it all the time, so it might even be a little dirty, Breville countertop oven. I love this oven because it has lots of different settings. I use it like a toaster oven. My favorite setting that it has is a proof setting. If you've ever seen the Great British Baking Show, they have little proof boxes on their station. This is the closest thing I've ever seen to getting one of those at home, but what's so great is it doesn't just do that one thing. It does a lot of things. This is not sponsored. I just legitimately love this oven. It's so great. I'll just pop this in here and we'll let it do its rising in there. Since the dough is forced into the shape of the tube, it should visually double in length and the majority of the dough should be touching the top of the glass cylinder. All right, the dough has risen. Mine is a little off center. It's worth pointing out. Like I thought I had it perfectly centered, but this side is definitely closer to the edge than this side is. You know, I'm not too concerned about it. I think it's still gonna bake up okay. And I am impressed to see how much it does look like a nice shaped loaf. Slightly tapered at the ends. You know, it's risen all the way to the top, just like it said. I'm gonna bake the loaf in a 375° Fahrenheit or 190° Celsius oven until it's nice and deeply golden brown. It should be nice and even, and we can see right through that glass cylinder. That's kind of one of the selling points, so it should be easy to tell. Another way to determine doneness of bread, my personal favorite, is to check the internal temperature. You can just stick a thermometer into the end of the loaf. Just try to get as close to the center as possible. It should read around 205 degrees Fahrenheit or 96 degrees Celsius. Okay, into the oven it goes. It's gonna take about 50 to 55 minutes. The bread looks nice and golden, very evenly browned, super excited about it, but now is the unmolding part. I like how in the infomercial they make it look so easy, like you just tip it out and it slides right out.
Not with your own from-scratch dough, or with frozen bread dough. Either way, you've never seen a more beautifully shaped, golden crusted loaf.
But because there are these kind of protective edges, we do have to pop it up. So see, we can't just tilt it out. Oh wait, no, see, we can't. Because of that. So I just have to pop that part out a little bit. Easier said than done. There we go, I got it, see? I'm just popping it out and resting it on the metal piece, and then I should just be able to
I don't want to say it. Don't say it.
It's so round. It slid right on out of there, albeit a touch slowly. And it's looking good. I guess I'll check the internal temperature just to get my mind off of what just happened to me. 205 on the dot. All right, let's make a sub from this yummy bread. It's okay to use the bread fairly fresh, but we do want to let it cool completely for the best texture. When you cut into a loaf of bread warm, as delicious as it is, it actually compresses the crumb structure and it can make the interior kind of gummy instead of like letting it cool completely, letting some of that steam kind of come out and just set the structure. So I've cooled this loaf, but it was, you know, it's nice and fresh still. I think the first thing I'm going to do is just cut some of the ends off to give myself a little chef snack and also to make it easier to cut in half. So I'm just gonna cut a little bit off of both ends, and that'll give us a chance to look at our pretty crumb structure and everything too. Okay, yeah, this is great. Like, look how nice and tight the crumb structure is. We have a nice even crust around that outer edge. This is a really nice loaf of bread for being made at home. I can hear a crust when I kind of like fold it like that, but then we also have this nice bouncy interior. It can be hard to get this kind of crust at home. So I'm actually kind of impressed with it. It browned fairly evenly, which it said it was gonna do. I think my loaf might be a little bit short. It may not be the full length that it should be, but that's okay. I mean, I'm making a sandwich, so it's a pretty good size for that. So give me a taste. It tastes exactly like a nice crusty loaf from the bakery or the bakery section of the grocery store, something you'd use to make a sub. It's good. I'm pretty happy with it. Nice flavor, great texture. Okay, let's build a sandwich. I'm gonna start by cutting the loaf in half horizontally with a serrated knife. And actually, before I fully cut it, you can see our loaf is round. We baked a round, okay? It did what it promised. It made a nice round cylindrical loaf, pretty smooth top. That's a good looking loaf. Now I'm gonna destroy it. What I wanna do is make kind of a cavity on both sides. I don't know about you, but as much as I love bread, this is too much bread for a sandwich, okay? I need room for toppings, fillings. I want lots of stuff in my sandwich encased by that delicious crusty loaf. So I'm gonna just use my hands to kind of tear apart the interior of the loaf, taking out a bunch of the interior crumb. I'm gonna save those to make some croutons with. That would be really good on soup. It would be really good on a salad, but I just don't want all of this bread, me personally. So I'm just gonna kind of take it right out of the center. All my other toppings are ready in front of me and I can't wait to tell you about them, but I still need to slice a tomato. That's the only super fresh thing. The sandwich I'm gonna make is sort of my version of that grinder sandwich that went viral on TikTok. If you haven't heard of it, it's basically an Italian sub, but with sort of a dressed salad slaw situation. I really love it. It's kind of one of my favorite sandwiches, so I thought it would be perfect for this. The full recipe's in the video description below, but I'm just gonna sort of quickly talk through it. I like to do a little base of a pickled pepper spread. Pickled pepper spread, pickled pepper spread. Peter Piper. Sometimes I make this myself, and that's the case today, but you can also buy this jarred in most stores, kind of with the other condiments, with other pepper products often too. I like it when it's a little bit spicy, but also if you don't like spice, you can even make something like this yourself with just roasted red peppers and a little vinegar. Just gives a little bit of that like tanginess, the pickliness. I just love that with this kind of sandwich. I'm gonna put a little bit of it on both sides. Now our other toppings. I've got salami, pepperoni, ham. You could use something like prosciutto, or I have sort of this rosemary ham that my grocery store sells that I really love. It'll be so good on this. I have provolone cheese, and I also have some fresh mozzarella that I've crumbled up. I've got those sliced tomatoes, and then the slaw mixture. This is so good. It's basically shredded iceberg lettuce, some thinly sliced red onion, a little bit of pepperoncini, and then you basically just make kind of an Italian dressing, but it's a little creamy. It's got some Parmesan in it. It's got a little mayo. That's why there's no mayo on the loaf, because this sort of is the mayo. So I like to start by building up the cheeses and meats on the base of the bread and kind of putting the slaw all in this cavity and then putting the two together. Look how good that already looks. And it would even be taller if we'd left all that bread inside. So I think that's super important that we took some out. Now I'm gonna scoop a ton of this slaw stuff, kind of pack it in as tightly as I can. I think some people make this TikTok viral sub a little bit differently. Mine, I think, tastes kind of close to a certain salad at a certain fast casual Italian restaurant. A garden of some sort. Can we not say the name? I'm not sure, I never know about that. And I'm actually going so far as to kind of pack it in because this is a slaw, so it's already wilted just a tiny bit, and that allows me to like wilted sounds like a bad word when it comes to salad, but in this case it's good because it means we'll get a little bit more of that in there. Only a little bit came out. That is skill. Look, this is the total amount that came out when I turned it over. I'm impressed with that. This loaf is so round. It's almost like I baked it round on purpose. So golden brown and so very round. Okay, here's my honest review of this pan. It definitely did what it said it was going to do. It made a golden brown, crisp crust, and it was fairly easy to shape, if not a little bit odd doing it. It definitely worked. If you're someone who likes to bake this style of bread, kind of that longer loaf for garlic bread or sandwiches, I think you might really like this pan. If you're somebody who likes to make homemade bread but struggle a little bit with the shaping and getting it even, this also might be something you'd enjoy. I think if you see it at a thrift store or an antique store for a low price, it's definitely worth it. But don't go out of your way to find it, especially if you like standard bread baking methods. Personally, I love classic bread shaping methods, and I'd really love to teach you some more of those too. So definitely let me know in the comments if you're interested, if you want more bread episodes. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Happy Baking. It was our most cylindrical episode yet. You can find the recipe for this bread and this sandwich in the video description below. And you know what I'd love? I'd love it if you'd leave me a comment of some other as seen on TV items that you'd like me to try out in future episodes of this series. Go on down there, leave a comment. And if you know someone nice enough to bake bread, check out the Bake Around pan. But until next time, wishing you lots of very round baking.